This week in On the Go, TBARTA Executive Director David Green.
If we can all support each other in all of our projects, then we can align ourselves to apply for and hopefully receive some of the federal money that's out there that all of these other regions are getting.
Welcome to On the Go, the TBARTA podcast, where we talk all things related to transit and transportation here in Tampa Bay. I'm your host, Chris Jadek, and I want to thank you for joining us on a momentous occasion because this is episode 1 of our new podcast. And what better way to start than with TBARTA's Executive Director, David Green. David, welcome to On the Go. And I want to say, I'm pretty excited we're doing a podcast. How about you?
I know. Look at us. This is unbelievable. Been a little while coming, but I'm glad we were able to finally do this.
First, a little background on those of you who may not know David. David Green joined TBARTA as Executive Director in November 2018, so we're coming up on 2 years here, bringing more than 20 years of transit experience to our area. He previously was Chief Executive Officer for GRTC Transit System, the Richmond, Virginia regional provider of public transportation. And just last year, he retired as a colonel from the United States Army Reserve after 30 years of service. So before we talk about TBARTA, because there's a lot of ground to cover here, I want to talk about the podcast itself. There are hundreds, thousands of podcasts out there. Why are we doing one, and what do you hope we can accomplish with this podcast?
This kind of stemmed from an idea I had several years ago, which originated of all places at public meetings that we had at the transit agency I was at up in Virginia. And I realized that a lot of people that attended these meetings had a fairly limited understanding of transit and things that go into it and how things get done. So transit is pretty unique. We're kind of this niche industry. You don't go to school and major in transit. So normally the only way you're able to understand it a little bit better is by working at a transit agency or some other organization that's in the industry. So my initial idea was to come up with some way to reach out to people, how to provide information to them, how to explain what transit's about and how to get projects done, how things work. So then when I came to Tampa Bay, I saw all these different agencies that are working in this transit space. We've got 5 different local transit operators. We've got 5 MPOs, TMOs, chambers of commerce, all these people who are part of this big regional transit sausage. And you've talked to a lot of these people. We've got some really talented folks, some experienced, passionate people at all these agencies that are doing really great things. But I noticed that a lot of these things that people are working on are known only by folks within their own individual counties, which makes sense because that's where these agencies operate. Those are the people who they serve. So I kept going back to that original idea and figured there's got to be some platform where we can share information and create some awareness about all of these people and agencies and services and projects that are happening in other counties to showcase these people and the cool things they're working on. So you and I chatted a little bit more about it, and here we are.
I think that's very well said. And the important thing is this is not a podcast where we're just going to talk about what TBARTA is doing, because the reality is there is so much transit, transportation, news, projects, things going on with our partners. That's what we're going to talk about as much as anything else here is what's going on in all our counties that kind of further the transit and the transportation mission. So I want to move on to TBARTA now, why we're here, which I think sets the foundation for the podcast itself and the future episodes. When you meet people for the first time and you have to give sort of the elevator speech on who we are, what we do, what do you say? How do you describe TBARTA?
Well, again, it falls back on what their understanding of transit is, and it generally involves me having to ask them questions. Typically, I mention TBARTA and you get that blank stare, and they don't always know what that means. So I usually have to understand their frame of reference. What county do they live in? What do they know about transit service? Do they know who their local service provider is? And then I kind of build off that. And once you start describing to people that the local operator that they know provides service within their own individual county, and you can't really take transit very well, not effectively, to get to another county, then things start to make sense for them. And you can see when that light bulb goes off and they get very quickly the benefit of a regional transit authority like TBARTA.
Yeah, that's interesting. And what you said there kind of touches on my next question, because I want to talk about how you're not from this area. You're from Richmond. You've been here for 2 years. You're like me, you're a transplant. Your career brought you here. My career brought me here as well. Now that you had a couple of years here in Tampa and had a better sense of who we are, what we do, what our challenges are, what our needs are, how do you characterize our transit situation compared to what you've seen and experienced in other parts of the country?
I think Tampa Bay has a lot of catching up to do. We're a big region. Our area, TBARTA's area, covers 5 counties, 3.5 million people. So we're a large metropolitan area, and there are not a lot of transit options. We provide local service within individual counties, but we're far behind other regions. And you can kind of get a sense of it when you talk to people and they say, well, I visited this region and they've got transit service like this, and I've visited that area and they provide these types of services. So other areas around the country are doing far better than Tampa Bay is right now, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, we definitely need to identify what all of these needs are, but we have to come up with ways to solve them and to start moving the needle to provide better options so people don't have to get in their cars and drive around. Tampa Bay is a very car-centric region, and the reason is because there aren't really many other options.
So we have county governments, we have MPOs, we have transit agencies and authorities throughout our 5 county area. Why a TBARTA then? Why is there a need for a TBARTA? What do we provide that local governments who are working on their own challenges can't provide independently?
I think it comes back to TBARTA's regional focus. Local governments or the local transit agencies, their purpose is to move people around their respective counties. Our purpose is about service that crosses county lines or connects activity centers or employment centers. The local providers, they provide local fixed route service, and TBARTA's focus is on more of an express type of service or commuter-oriented service. So I think because of the nature of our focus, we're able to help with a couple things. One being job access, and then secondly, regional competitiveness. When you talk about job access, there are people in Tampa Bay that don't have cars. They rely on transit service to be able to get around. And if you've got limited transit options, then you're limiting them in the job opportunities that they have. So by developing a regional network and providing regional transit options, you're opening up an entirely new world for people to access jobs to better their quality of life. When you shift into regional competitiveness, kind of what I was referring to a couple of minutes ago, when you visit these other places around the country with services that people are expecting now, businesses have that same mentality. And if you're thinking about attracting or retaining businesses, they want to have services and amenities available for their employees that would keep their employees with them. And the most popular example is Amazon HQ2 a couple of years ago. They were soliciting proposals about where they were going to relocate their second headquarters. And one of their criteria on their list was regional transit. And they wanted to know what sort of transit network existed in all of these different places. So, everybody submitted proposals. Everybody was looking for Amazon to relocate a second headquarters in their area. But a lot of these places never had a chance at all just because they didn't have the regional services that Amazon was looking for.
I want to talk about TBARTA's history a little bit, what we are today compared to what we were when TBARTA originated. I think in 2007, really in 2017, TBARTA changed. Explain that process to me, what we used to be and really what we are now, how that's different.
Yeah, we've definitely gone through a bit of an evolution. And I joke that TBARTA is the world's oldest startup company. We've been around for 13 years. It was originally set up as a regional transportation authority. And then after 10 years, it was decided at the legislature that TBARTA should be more focused on transit specifically. So the state statute was changed and the makeup of the board changed and the geographic footprint changed, and it was reduced from 7 counties at the time to 5 counties, which we cover now. The biggest, deliverable that changed was previously there was a regional long-range transportation plan that TBARTA was responsible for completing. And now our deliverable is a regional transit development plan, which is a little bit different. And it's something that transit agencies are required to produce.
I like your description that we're the world's oldest startup company, because I think that's kind of correct. I certainly like that. I'm going to use that. Let's talk about the RTDP. You mentioned that a little bit. When I go out and I make a few presentations, I explain that as really the foundation. It's the blueprint for what we can build in this area, but it's not the building and the structure itself. How do you describe the RTDP and why it's fundamental to what we do?
Foundation is a great word. The RTDP is the starting point of where we are. It describes the conditions that exist now and a regional vision of what transit could be. The plan as a whole includes a lot of information, but it basically identifies projects and services that would benefit people throughout the entire region.
It's a very detailed plan. And of course, I'd like to remind people if they want to read it, I think all 237 pages are on tbarta.com. I invite you to take a look at that because so much work went into that and a lot of perspectives. I especially thought that the peer analysis I thought was very revealing. You know, how do we compare to other areas around the country? We don't have time to go through the whole RTDP. That would be a series of podcasts, I think. But for the purpose of this conversation, what was revealing about the RTDP? What did you think you might have learned, or some of the major findings for you that came out in that?
To me, the most interesting takeaways were from the public feedback that we received. We did a couple surveys in all 5 counties to see what people thought our priorities should be. And the top priority people identified was connecting destinations, which really highlights the difference between TBARTA and the local transit operators. We also got information about strategy. We wanted to take a view of short-term versus long-term. And the feedback that we received related to our short-term strategy is that we should focus on accessible transit for all and more frequent transit service. And I think we're working on both of those things a little bit already, trying to provide more service to the transportation disadvantaged community and hoping to implement a program related to that in the upcoming year. And more frequent service, refers to existing service, but it's something that we might be able to help the local operators with now to improve their service. From a long-term strategy, we found out that people are looking for seamless regional travel and then premium regional transit options. I thought that was just really great feedback, and it gives us a more clear picture of what we need to focus on moving forward.
And one of the things that I thought was important in the whole process was it demonstrated how TBARTA reaches out, cooperates, and coordinates with what we've decided are our core partners, those being the county governments, the MPOs, the transit agencies, and of course, FDOT, who we work very closely with. In this process, we listened to the feedback, we incorporated it, and even to the point where we were ready to bring the final RTDP for board approval, we received feedback from the counties. We solicited that, and I think we reacted to that well, and there was a lot of dialogue there so that we adjusted that plan to make sure that it's not just what TBARTA thinks is good for the region. It's really what the region is telling us it needs from a TBARTA. I think that spirit of cooperation is something that we want to make sure people understand. That's what TBARTA is all about. Would you agree?
Oh, completely. And I mean, you were part of this process all along the way. And I mean, it was 18 months from start to finish. And a large portion of the work involved research and outreach to the community, and then pulling all of this information and the data from the surveys together to put into plans. And there were draft tech memos and all of these documents that were prepared along the way. As we were winding down, we had a board workshop where we solicited more specific and detailed feedback from board members about what they thought the plan should involve. And that included 4 areas, planning, operations, funding, and branding. We ended up rolling everything into a draft plan a couple of months later, and we presented that to the board and obviously shared that with the community. And we got some really helpful feedback. And I appreciated the time and effort that it took people to actually go through that plan. I mean, you alluded to how long this plan is a few minutes ago. but they provided some really detailed feedback that we then incorporated into the final plan, which ultimately was approved by the board. But there definitely were changes made along the way, and I think to the benefit of the plan.
So the plan has been adopted by the board. It's an unfunded plan. So essentially it's blueprints without the funds to buy or build the house, you could say. What happens now?
The biggest nut we have to crack is to find funding. There were 3 scenarios that were identified in the plan. One was the status quo scenario, and then there were low impact scenarios and a high impact scenario. And I think everybody would love to proceed toward that high impact scenario with the most regional service that we could possibly implement, but that requires funding. And as you said, the plan as it is unfunded. So that is task number 1. We have to work with the local governments and our state legislators to try to identify funding to implement some of these services. Another key point of the board approval process is they made a point to ask us to continue collaborating with our local partners. So that is going to be part of what we continue to do as well. I think it also goes beyond the plan. It's also tied to how we can provide more value to our partners and support them with things that they happen to be working on as well.
We're going to pause for a moment here and let you catch your breath. I'm going to catch my breath too. We've talked a lot kind of foundationally what TBARTA is and wants to do. We're also working on some very real projects right now. So when we come back, we want to talk about regional rapid transit, which is our I-275 bus rapid transit project. We'll talk about commuter services, which predates both of us. It goes back to the start, really actually before TBARTA began. And of course, innovative transit technology, everything from air taxis to hyperloop. All that's coming up in just a moment.
As Tampa Bay gets back to work, morning and evening commuters are also starting to crowd back onto local roads. Maybe you've been teleworking and aren't ready to restart the rush hour grind. If so, Commute Tampa Bay can help. Go to CommuteTampaBay.com and find out how someone else can drive you to work in a TBARTA van pool. You'll avoid the aggravation of driving, make new friends, help the environment, and save up to thousands of dollars each year. Commute Tampa Bay. It's the smarter way to work.
Welcome back to On the Go. In our last segment, we talked about TBARTA's goals, vision, and mission. But now we want to talk about some of the very real work we're undertaking right now that can help begin to meet our regional transit needs in the coming decade. Most notably, that would be our bus rapid transit project along I-275, connecting Pasco, Hillsborough, and Pinellas County, which we call regional rapid transit. But before we talk about that project itself, I want to talk about the technology of bus rapid transit, the BRT. I think it's a misunderstood technology. We know that it's growing worldwide. I want to ask David about that. What is bus rapid transit and why should we get excited about it?
BRT it's a completely different mode of transit. Most people are familiar with local fixed route service or subways or commuter rail. BRT provides the same benefits as like a light rail service, but at a fraction of the cost. It operates on rubber wheel vehicles. Similar concept, operating plan, but it's just a different type of vehicle. And again, it's just a far more affordable option than implementing typical rail projects.
And there's a lot of BRT around the country. I think one of the challenges here is that you don't know what other technologies are being used, not only around the world, but around the country as well. There are a lot of BRT projects here in the United States, even around the world.
Absolutely. And they're far more prevalent in other countries. South America has quite a few. They're big in China as well, but they definitely are catching on here. The first BRT in the United States dates back to maybe the 1970s, but they're becoming more and more popular, and localities are realizing that they can get a bigger bang for the buck implementing a sort of BRT project versus the traditional rail. Again, they just include more amenities and features than your traditional bus service.
You know, there are a lot of transit terms out there that I think those in the industry readily understand, but for the public, which is ultimately going to be served by this and has to make the decisions on what we want to do related to transit and transportation, I think sometimes there's confusion over a lot of different terms. And one term that's come up for me has been express bus. We know there's express bus in this area, and then you hear bus rapid transit. They sound like they're the same thing. And so people may say, well, why are we spending money on this? We've got express bus. Help me understand those concepts for our people.
Express bus service typically starts at one point and ends at another, and there are limited stops, if any stops at all. But you could have a stop or two along the way, but it travels great distances connecting to primary points. The main difference between express bus service and BRT is dedicated transit lanes. If you have an express bus operating, whether it's on a highway or on some arterial road, it operates in general traffic. So there's no time savings to express bus service. The bus is stuck in the same traffic as everybody else. The greatest benefit of BRT, true BRT, is that much of it operates in dedicated transit lanes. So there is no traffic conflict from other vehicles operating in the lane with the buses. So if there are congestion issues with traffic, the bus can bypass that because it's in its own lane. And again, a similar feature to a rail project. If you've got a train on a train track, it has no traffic conflicts with cars. So that's, to me, the greatest difference between BRT and express bus service.
And that's the point I think a lot of people need to understand is we're trying to solve the problem of getting from point A to point B and do so as quickly as possible. I've been on the Howard Franklin on 275 in rush hour. We've all done that. Getting from Pasco to Pinellas is challenging given that we have a lot of area. We're very spread out. And so it takes a lot of miles, a lot of driving to get there. And we're all choked on certain roadways. So it seems like at BRT, the rapid part of it, being able to, get around those traffic chokeholds that we are stuck with, one of the big benefits I think that people would really gravitate to. And so I know that we're looking forward to that. I want to talk about rail. We hear about light rail, commuter rail, and those things were considered in the regional transit feasibility study, which led up to this proposal that we have out there right now and the study that we have going on. But why a BRT project as opposed to a rail project? And does BRT mean, well, then we're not doing rail, or we would not do rail in the future?
No, it doesn't mean that at all. The feasibility plan, it considered information that was developed in many different plans that were done throughout the years, over decades. And there were many criteria that the analysis looked at, and there were two main projects that kind of rose to the surface out of that plan. One was a BRT project and another was a rail project. Two really great services. A rail project specifically connecting downtown Tampa to the USF area. The thing I think that put the regional BRT project over the top was the affordability of it compared to a rail project, but then also the fact that this particular regional BRT, it provides service to 3 different counties. So it truly is a regional project versus the rail project, which would just operate within Hillsborough County alone.
We know these projects take a long time. Certainly people are anxious for near-term solutions because it's been years. We've been wrestling with a lot of these issues. We are in what is known as the PD&E stage right now, that study stage. Help me understand the process and the timeline of the BRT project. Where are we and where do we intend to go?
PD&E was the next step of the process. So the regional transit feasibility plan, as you mentioned, that was conceptual. It identified what the route was going to be, Wesley Chapel to downtown St. Pete through Tampa. It identified the corridor as being Interstate 275 and identified the mode, which is BRT. That's kind of it. So the PD&E it's developing the project. It's answering all the questions that people obviously have about what the project is all about. So we're going to determine how many stations are there going to be? Where are the stations going to be located? What are the stations going to look like? How much of the corridor will involve dedicated transit lanes and where will they be? What sort of vehicles will be used and what are they going to look like and what's the seating capacity going to be? And then we'll get into things related to the operating plan. What are the hours of service? What's the fare going to be? How many vehicles are going to be required in order to provide this service? And then we'll do some environmental work as well, just to have a good understanding of how this project might impact the area.
And for those listening, I want to remind everybody that all this information is on TBARTA.com. There's a special section devoted to regional rapid transit. We post all of our reports, maps, a lot of videos. We've had news media coverage on this as well, too. So those who are interested in seeing where we are, what the plot is along I-275 and the stations that we're proposing right now can see all of that on TBARTA.com. I want to talk about the funding. One of our big objectives in TBARTA is to bring more funding into the region, specifically federal funds. And I will tell you, David, I see these hundreds of millions of dollars going to other cities around the country. We, of course, benefited. I think we got a great, I think about $21 million for Sunrunner, which is that great BRT project that PSTA is working on with FDOT over in Pinellas County. And that's great to see that we've got some BRT coming our way. But I feel like there's a lot of other dollars out there that we have not been able to take advantage of. And really, this project is one that kind of positions us to really get a piece of that and bring those federal dollars here as opposed to other parts of the country. Wouldn't you say, is that where we're supposed to go?
Completely, yeah. And it's not just about our project, it's about projects that some of our local operators are working on as well. And I think it's a matter of working together and not approaching things whereby it looks like we're competing with one another for grant funds, but we're working together and we're collaborating on whose project is in what place during the project life cycle and who needs dollars, federal dollars, when, and just coordinating all that activity. But if we can all support each other in all of our projects, then we can align ourselves to apply for and hopefully receive some of the federal money that's out there that all of these other regions are getting. Because like you said, I mean, the Sunrunner getting up and going and getting that federal money for implementation was fantastic. So huge for Tampa Bay. But there are so many more federal dollars that are out there that we're missing out on because we just haven't been collaborating like we should and like a lot of these other regions are doing, because they're implementing projects that are, as you said, hundreds of millions of dollars, and they're successful. They're putting them in place. Those are the projects that you see when you travel around and you wonder, why don't we have service like that in Tampa Bay?
So RRT is one of those projects. If we align with our counties and our partners and we agree this is how we want to move forward, what happens once the study is done? This positions us to apply for some federal funding. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're going to apply to get into the Capital Investment Grant Program, the FTA program for grant funding. And then we're going to continue to work on the project. This PD&E study will take us through about 30% design. There's still quite a bit of design work that needs to occur before we can actually implement it. So we would certainly want to continue on with additional design work to get it to a point where we'd be ready to break ground and actually start building stations. Our work is contingent upon work that FDOT is doing as well on Interstate 275. Everybody in the area knows all of the road work that they've got planned for the interstate. All of that has got to be complete before our service can be implemented and actually begin operating.
That's for sure. There's a lot of work ahead of us, and we're anxious for those solutions. So for someone who says, all right, realistically, when might I be writing on BRT? I know decisions still have to be made. We have to get the grant approved and things like that take time. But is there a timeline as to when we thought we could be operational?
Yeah, we're a few years out. Again, first things first is the work on the interstate that FDOT is doing, the replacement of the Howard Franklin Bridge. Our goal would be to implement service sooner than later. So one of the strategies that we've talked about is implementing this project in phases, because to wait until all of the interstate work is complete, I mean, it could be 6, 8, 9 years out. I'm not exactly sure what their timeline is, but as they complete road work, there is a possibility that we could implement the regional BRT project in phases and get it up and running as they continue on with their interstate work. So could potentially, best case scenario, maybe 4 or 5 years out.
Excellent. That would be great. I want to shift gears here a little bit while we still have time and talk about innovative transit technologies. The state has given us some money to explore that. It seems that the state is looking to TBARTA to take on more of a leadership role when it comes to innovative, futuristic technologies. And by that, I mean the air taxis, the aerial gondolas, even hyperloop. We've had some presentations to the TBARTA board. Where are we? Where is TBARTA with that? And would you say that the state wants us to be looking at these things for the benefit of the region and in some cases for the entire state?
Well, it's interesting because that's kind of how it turned out. We weren't looking to get into that position, but the state awarded TBARTA some grant funds in order to explore exactly what you just described. Things like hyperloop and urban air mobility involving air taxis and cable propelled transit. So we conducted a study. It was a very high level feasibility study about those three different modes and came away with different recommendations. But at this point, the study is complete and we're in the process of finding out what interest exists in the community and with the local jurisdictions as to what, if any, of those projects to continue moving forward or any other ideas that they might want us to explore as well.
And we've had a few presentations recently to the TBARTA board. As you mentioned, the study completed, I think it was in June of this year. And by the way, once again, it's all on tbarta.com for anybody who wants to read it. And then we started getting a few presentations, and that has been out in the media as well as we, talk about hyperloop and air taxis, aerial gondolas. We've seen some localities have various interests on some of those without going into any details because everything's very preliminary and we're just really talking about that. But we're having these presentations and people think, oh, TBARTA is moving, TBARTA is developing hyperloop or TBARTA is developing this, even though we have these presentations. Explain a little bit about why we do these presentations and kind of where we are when it comes to the innovative transit technology, why we've had a lot of different vendors over the last few months presenting to the board.
Well, it's to inform and update the board on what these technologies are and to explain to them what the recommendations were from the consultant that worked on this study with us. And the recommendations, again, they were different for all the different modes because all of them are in different phases of their life cycle. Cable propelled transit has been around for a long, long time, centuries. That exists today. It operates a couple of places in the United States, New York City and in Portland. So it's a matter of informing them of the advantages, disadvantages, challenges in these types of services. Hyperloop and urban air mobility, those are technologies that are still in development. They're not really operating anywhere yet. So it's an education process. And then finding out from the board their level of interest in advancing any of these ideas.
So these information presentations, and I think they're great, they're very educational, don't necessarily mean the board is moving forward on them, but understandably, there's a lot out there and there are limited dollars to spend on any of these things. So those are big decisions to make, and you've got to gain a lot of knowledge first before you can make those decisions. I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about commuter services. As mentioned, commuter services actually predates TBARTA from 2007. And of course, this is the service that helps reduce road congestion in our area by encouraging alternative transportation, everything from van pools, carpools, certainly public transit, biking, walking, even working at home, which I'm doing today, you're doing today, and many of us have become more used to. Tell us what we're doing with that program and what's your vision for TBARTA's commuter services, which we know as Commute Tampa Bay, moving forward.
Yeah, as you said, the program has been around for quite some time, and it's really popular throughout the community. The focus of commuter services is to educate employers throughout the region on commute alternatives, things besides their employees getting in their cars by themselves and driving into work along with everybody else who's in their cars by themselves. I think it's 80% is the statistic that we've got of commuters are driving to work by themselves. Again, it gets back to because there are no other transit options. So we educate employers on the benefits of carpooling and van pooling or biking to work if employees live that close to their employers, and teleworking. Very popular program. This was a program that I felt had the greatest opportunity for improvement, when I arrived at TBARTA. It has a ton of potential, but it just kind of needed a refresh. So the past year, we spent rebranding the program. We reorganized the department. We implemented a new ride match platform that commuters can use to see if there are any other folks near where they live going to the same general area where they work. We updated the emergency ride home program. We expanded the service that we provide related to this down into Manatee County, which we didn't really serve before. And we continued to grow the van pool program despite the COVID situation that we're in right now. Commuter services it's a really important part of TBARTA's overall mission of moving people throughout the region and reducing congestion. And we'll continue to focus on turning this into a model program.
You mentioned COVID-19, and that really leads me to my next question. Certainly that's changed our commuting habits over the past year. And I think it's kind of unknown what the future means for that. We've certainly learned to work from home more. There's a lot of questions about where businesses are going to go. So a lot of unanswered questions about that. But what do you think the impact of COVID-19 might have on commuter services? And for that matter, all the work that we do at TBARTA in developing regional transportation, because we're still going to be a region regardless of whether there's COVID-19 or not, and we need to get places within that region.
That's the million-dollar question. I mean, that's a conversation that people are having everywhere because nobody expected COVID a year ago. Nobody would have imagined that we were going to be in this situation we're in right now. And I don't think anybody really knows how we're going to come out of it on the other end. One thing that we learned is that people can be productive at home. Teleworking has always existed. It's always been a thing, but it's been a very, very small percentage of employees that actually would take advantage of that opportunity. We have proved, people everywhere have proved that they can be productive. So I think teleworking will probably remain in place in some form or fashion moving forward. I wouldn't say that people will telework 5 days a week, but I could see people working from home 2 or 3 days a week and then maybe going to the office the other days. Another question that people are asking is about transit ridership on some of these legacy systems like subways and rail and fixed route buses. And will ridership ever return to the levels that it was at prior to the pandemic? What preferences do riders have? Are they going to have moving forward that didn't exist before? One thing that transit operators have been doing in response to all of this is providing apps where riders can see the capacity of a bus before it ever arrives to see if there is room on the bus for them to safely board and take their trip, or would they possibly rather wait for that next bus? Another thing people are interested in is contactless payment options. Instead of getting on board a bus or going through a subway turnstile and touching these things and the fare box and inserting fare cards, is there a way that you can pay remotely on your phone through an app or something of that nature? Just innovative ideas. Mobility on demand is another thing. Microtransit, you may have heard that term, and mobility as a service. These are all new concepts that more and more agencies are exploring and will potentially put in place.
I know we'll talk about those transit technologies in the episodes to come too, so I'm glad you touched on those. At the heart of these transit agencies, of course, are the people themselves. And I think you'd probably join me in commending all our transit agencies, authorities, the people who work there, because transit is an essential service. There are so many people who depend on us, don't have an automobile to get from point A to point B, whether it's in Manatee, Hernando, or any county in between. And I think the work of all those people is to be commended, because we were all being told to stay at home and isolate. And if you go out in public, you're putting yourself at risk and other people at risk. Well, our transit agencies needed to be there. And I would say our transit agencies in all 5 counties certainly have stepped up. And I want to commend them. And I think you probably do too.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, the response by the transit operators has been tremendous. Again, nobody saw any of this coming, but yet they still had to continue to operate. Not only did they need to keep their riders safe, but they also need to keep their employees safe. Everybody needs to have that comfort level that they can go into work and they can ride transit and they don't have to worry about their health. So absolutely, hat goes off to them. And They've been doing a tremendous job at disinfecting the vehicles and making sure that people can ride transit safely.
We're winding down here. I'm going to ask you one final question, a little broad question here, but really kind of goes to the core of what TBARTA is all about. And I want to ask you how you see TBARTA's role being in enhancing the work of our transit agencies, our MPOs, and our counties, because as we know, we're going to have budgetary challenges. We've always had a budgetary challenge, but with COVID-19, those challenges are compounded, and we have local officials who are working on some very real-term issues right now, and TBARTA wants to be engaged with that. There's no question. We want to help solve those issues. How can we help solve the near-term real crisis issues related to budgets and transportation and still be true to our core mission, which is to expand world-class region-wide transit, which we know the entire region will benefit from?
I mean, I think it's a matter of continuing to work with our local partners and collaborate and understand what their challenges are and how we might be able to support them in meeting their goals and projects that they're pursuing and new services or programs that they would like to roll out. We've got our projects that we're working on, but you can't have a quality regional network without a strong local service. So we've got an obligation to support them. And I think it goes both ways. So just continuing that dialogue and understanding the situation that everyone is in, and then figuring out together how we navigate all of that and bring more dollars into the Tampa Bay region that haven't existed before.
Very well said, David. Thank you for that. And with that, our time is up. I want to thank all of you for joining us for On the Go. This is the podcast of the Tampa Bay Area Regional Transit Authority, where we talk all things transit and transportation here in Tampa Bay. Until next time, I'm Chris Jadek. Have a great day.